Right.
Well, we're getting to see you here in the gritty new film, No Future. What made you want to be a part of this movie?
I read the script and really thought it was incredible. I thought it's an incredibly sort of challenging film in a lot of ways. It's not, it doesn't really let you off the hook as an audience member or as an actor. You know, there's not really many breaks from the sort of oppressive, kind of immersive tone of it.
Mm.
So I think I was simultaneously sort of excited by it and intimidated by it in reading it. And I think that's exactly the kind of project that I want to be a part of, you know, something that scares me a little bit. Um, and then also just speaking with the directors of the film, Mark and Andy, those guys are such sort of incredibly consummate artists, but also incredibly kind, generous people. So I also knew that, you know, it's about the project, but it's also about the people who are making it, and the people who are making the film are such kind geniuses that I really knew I needed to be involved.
What kind of insight did they give you then into Chris's background?
Yeah, it's a fascinating. It's also a sort of fascinating and strange character because he's a real presence in the film, but he honestly doesn't spend much time on screen. And so, kind of building a world that takes place off screen, that takes place before the action, especially in that relationship with Charlie's character.
Yeah, well.
It felt very important to sort of flesh that out such that it felt like there was real history there, because it's kind of it's a movie that, you know, no pun intended, is more about it is about history, not the future. You know, it's about what has already happened. It's about the sort of connection that these guys had in the past, and then there's sort of the trauma that they have in common, with the addiction that they've struggled with their whole lives. So it is so much about what happens before the action of the film, and off camera. And so talking to those guys to try to flesh that out and sort of get a kind of firmer understanding of, Chris's relationship to the other characters in the film was a sort of a real necessity. And especially when it's you're working with actors who you're meeting for the first time, you know. So I worked on the film for about a week, came in and sort of had these scenes with these brilliant actors who my character has known for his whole life, but who I'm just meeting for the first time. So any sort of anything I could do to kind of feel a sense of familiarity and history with those actors was a real gift, you know.
Did you and Charlie then talk a little bit to flesh out where things stood between the two of you on screen at this point in their relationship with the characters?
A little bit. And then also what's fascinating is they both also have such a different relationship to their pasts. Like they have a shared past, but Chris sort of longs to return to it. And that's not necessarily the way, that Charlie's character feels. So it's a really fascinating, it's one of these things you don't want to sync up too much, because obviously they each have their own very specific kind of different relationship to that history, and also in some ways then like remember it differently. You know, the past is a kind of mercurial thing that can be very different through two different people's experiences of it. So I think it's sometimes important to like sync up, but it's also sometimes important to leave those kind of ideas separate, because that brings a sort of specificity to each person's work, you know?
Right, and you don't want their influence on who you see the character to be as well.
Absolutely, yeah. You want to sort of leave room for everybody's personal process and personal sort of experience of the given circumstances, you know? And so it's great to talk that stuff out. It's great to flesh it out, but then it's also great to say, "Oh, amazing. I'm so excited about your version of this." And at a certain point, it's not even helpful to kind of, um,
Spend much time dwelling on it all.
yeah. I think individually, I'm sure we spent a lot of time dwelling on it all, but part of this sort of story is about these two guys who have very different sort of recollections of and relationships to their past, you know?
Is there something about this particular time in Chris's life where he's redrawn to Will, or is it just like it's time has passed. He feels like, now is the time to reconnect with someone he had such a good time raging with.
Well, I think he also, yeah, I think he's finding it very, very hard to imagine his own path forward. You know, I think he's finding it very hard to imagine his own future, sort of where he fits in the world in a larger sense, but also just like literally in a day to day sense, like what the fuck he's going to do with his time. And so, in the absence of that clear path forward, I think he's reaching back into the past to try to sort of recapture the only happy memories he has, maybe, and Will is a huge part of that. I think Will is a huge part of the sort of happiest time of Chris's life. So I think it makes sense that when he doesn't know what to do next, he looks instead behind him into the past, at the same time that Will is trying to escape that past and sort of press into a future, because Will obviously has a sort of path ahead of him, a way forward, this relationship, his job. He has a sort of journey ahead. I think Chris doesn't. And so he's looking behind him for that kind of connection.
But Chris doesn't seem suicidal. So he's not taking these drugs thinking that this is going to end his life. And this isn't his way of like one last hurrah, though, at the same time. I feel like, Chris doesn't expect that tonight is, their one time to reconnect or nothing.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think that the film in the edit leaves it quite ambiguous what if Chris is making a sort of deliberate decision to end his life, or if he's just seeking comfort, just seeking a sort of a kind of more temporary form of escape. But there is such a kind of fatalistic tone to the dialogue in that scene with Will. There's such a kind of finality to it when he walks away from that porch. There's such a sort of, to me, reading the script and then also watching the way it's been shot and edited, it does feel as though that was maybe the only version of a future that Chris was interested in. And when he walks away from that porch, I think there's nothing. He's once again left with no path forward.
No future.
I know, it's so funny because I'm trying to avoid, I guess, using
the cliche.
But I really think it's a very resonant
yes
image. It's a very sort of resonant image.
With such an intense theme, and as we mentioned, gritty scenes, how did you decompress after a long day of shooting the movie?
Yeah, it is one of these ones that sticks with you, because I really didn't spend much time on set, but the time I was there, in order to sort of pay respect to the material, because the material also, I think, deserves tremendous respect. These characters, their sort of struggle and their trauma is so kind of painful, that in order to pay respect to the character, I think it's important to not to not sort of take shortcuts as an actor in that context. But it's also important to sort of preserve your own well-being, and it's also important
your
to
own mental.
Yeah, go back to your life after working on something like that. So it's a tricky balance. It's a tricky balance how much you like stare into the abyss with something like that, because it is. Yeah, it's a film I feel tremendously proud to be a part of. I feel sort of tremendously lucky to be a part of. And also at the end of the day, you have to continue and press on and find the joy. And also like, as sort of dark and dour and kind of incredibly successfully immersive the atmosphere of the film is, it was also a very sort of loving, kind, generous set environment. And the people involved are lovely, kind, generous, fun people. So even as the sort of tone of the material, it can be incredibly challenging. The set environment, the work environment was no more challenging than it needed to be for the sake of the material. Like everybody there was a lovely sort of kind person. So it's also fun to be on set, even when the material, and it's such a blessing. It's such a like, anytime you get to be on set with a group of people like that who are so sort of committed and creative and talented and generous, that's such a joy in and of itself that that sort of works as a counterpoint to the difficulty of the material, you know?
We get a good sense of Chris's character from his conversations and interactions between him and his mother. Was there anything that wasn't really included in the film that would help us understand his relationship more with her or who he was?
It's fascinating because you, in the scene with her, you also sort of see him, you see them both after the sort of happy days of their relationship. You know, you see them sort of far into the decline, the like slow, painful decline of their relationship. And so you're seeing sort of the ghost of the love that they felt for each other or their capacity to express it, you know?
Mm.
And so that's just a really heartbreaking thing because it's a very, I think the script is also powerfully minimalistic. It's powerfully sparse. It leaves a lot unsaid. And particularly in that scene with his mother, I think there is a lot that is unsaid, which is also heartbreaking because I think that, you know, his mother doesn't know it's her last opportunity to say it, you know? And so, yeah, I guess that, yeah, you're exactly right that what's so charged is their shared history. And I think there's something beautiful in what they've been through together to a certain extent, right? Like to a certain extent, nobody understands Chris and what he's been through better than his mother, who has gone through it with him, you know,
Every
like
step.
yeah. And that's such a heartbreaking thing that there's an incredible intimacy in that and an incredible sort of vulnerability in that. But that's also vulnerability, the flip side of that is that it can also be incredibly uncomfortable and incredibly sort of difficult to contend with. It can be difficult to come face to face with the person who has seen you at your absolute worst, with the person who you have failed in your own eyes, who Chris feels he has failed over and over and over. I think it's incredibly painful for him to even look at her. You know, I think he feels as though he's failed her over and over and over again, which is so
I'm sure
heartbreaking
he
because
does.
even though there's that intimacy between them, the connection that they have, a lot of it is kind of built on the difficulty of what they've been through together, you know?
Well, there's nothing like the relationship between a mother and son, and this is just a sad ending to, there's just a sad ending to this particular one. What do you hope viewers take away from watching No Future, or maybe even what you personally took away from being a part of this film?
I mean, being a part of the film, you know, was a privilege and a joy for many, many reasons. I guess I hope one thing that I took away from this, and something that I hope that viewers will too, is a sort of profound empathy for people struggling with addiction, um, because it's obviously a kind of insidious disease, you know, and there is a kind of really just heartbreaking sort of inevitability to the trajectory of the film. You know, it feels as though it's just this kind of brutal inevitability that Will is sort of marching towards using again. And I guess that there's this that made me feel tremendous kind of empathy towards Will and towards all the sort of characters in the film. But I guess there's also such like hope. There's also such like grace and possibility and love to be found even in the kind of darkest moments. You know, I think that as sad as it is, like the love that Will finds over the course of the film is itself sort of redemptive, that even at his kind of darkest moments, these people find each other and sort of see something beautiful in each other that they're drawn to. So I guess, yeah, I guess that's very kind of, I'm being very vague, but I guess I just hope that
You got to watch the movie to see what you take away from it, though.
Yeah, yeah. I hope that it's so frustrating because it's also like you don't want to glorify addiction.
Oh,
It's
oh,
like
certainly.
there's beauty even in the darkest moments because there's a sort of there's more pain, there's more suffering than there is beauty in the disease, you know? And it's sort of, yeah, I guess, yeah, it's a real sort of tragedy. It's a real sort of tragedy in the kind of purest sense.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how incredible you are on Yellowstone. Jimmy is
Um,
such a beloved character, and you root for him. You've rooted for him from day one. I think if anyone's watched one episode of the series, and that's their takeaway, is that they really have a hope for this character. Did you expect him to become such a fan favorite of the series when you took on this role?
I think I loved him from the beginning, you know, and he's a bit of an underdog, and I think people love to root
That's
for an
fine.
underdog, you know. So I felt tremendous sort of hope for Jimmy from the beginning, and it's incredibly gratifying to see other people sort of feel the same way or connect to him. I think we all feel like the underdog most of the time, you know. I think that 99.9% of people are the underdogs, first of all, because of the glaring socioeconomic disparity that reflects the sort of horrors of late capitalism, but also like uh, because we all sort of feel like the idiot. We all feel like the goofball, and Jimmy is so the idiot and so the goofball that like he embodies, yeah, we all I think see ourselves in Jimmy a little bit, but we also see ourselves in the we all see ourselves in Kevin Costner a little bit. We all see ourselves in Rip a little bit on our good days, you know?
Beth, a little
Yeah,
bit too.
exactly. Exactly. On your good days, you don't see yourself as Jimmy, you know?
Well, I'm not to tease too much about what's to come in season three, but is Jimmy getting back into bull riding because he truly wants to, or because he's come so far and done a whole 180? He's got this woman in his life that seems to be such a, his rooting section. Does he feel like he owes it to her to get back out there, or is this something he truly wants to be doing?
It's a great question. It's a great question. I think that Jimmy's never felt good at anything in his whole life. And it's hard to walk away from the first thing he's ever felt good at, which is, not to speak for all actors, but acting is nothing but constant rejection and failure, effectively. But it's also sometimes the only thing we love and the only thing we feel good at. So we keep coming back to it over and over again and getting back on the horse that continues to punish us. I think that for Jimmy, it's hard to walk away from the only thing he's ever felt good at.
Do you have any other upcoming projects we can see you in soon? I'm not sure when Yellowstone's going to get back out there.
Yeah, an Apple TV show called Invasion that's coming out I think later this year. Hopefully, the trailer just dropped for that. I've got a movie coming up someday with Tandy Way Newton called God's Country, directed by Julian Higgins, who's a brilliant director making his first feature, and I think it's going to be really incredible. So I hope people check that out. That's kind of in this same indie space, and it's an incredible sort of neo-Western thriller starring Tandy Way Newton, Joris Jarsky, just a cast of really brilliant Jeremy Bobb, Kai Lennox, a lot of really cool actors. So I hope people check that out. Yeah,